Welcome everyone to today's webinar, What is Your Revenue Cycle Data Really Telling You? On behalf of Becker's Healthcare, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we start, I'm going to walk through just a few quick housekeeping instructions here. So first, we will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we will have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. So you can go ahead and submit any questions that you have throughout the webinar by typing them into that Q&A box that you should see on your screen. And if there are any questions we don't get to during the Q&A portion, the panelists will be able to follow up with those responses afterward. Today's session is also being recorded and it will be available after the event, so you can go ahead and use the same link that you used to log into today's webinar to access that recording once it's available. And then if at any time if you don't see your slides moving or if you're having trouble with the audio, just try refreshing your browser, and you can also use that same Q&A box for any technical questions. We're here to help with those. So with that, I am pleased to welcome today's speakers. First, we have Linda Perryclear. She is the Product Line Director for Availity Revenue Cycle Management, and Justin Greer, the Product Line Manager for Availity. Linda and Justin, thank you again for being here today. Linda, I'll now go ahead and turn the floor over to you.
Well, thanks, and we appreciate you guys spending time with us today. Justin and I, we're really excited to share some information with you about how you can use data to help manage your revenue cycle. We really want this to be conversational. We understand, you know, these are challenging, these webinars, but we really want to exchange information with each other the best that we can through chat. So Justin and I will be walking through some information today, and our goal really is to share with you what we've learned about data so that you can help you and your organization manage your revenue cycle more effectively. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and we'll get started. So thanks again for joining. So really when we jump in here and we say buzzwords, what do they all mean? You're going to hear these terms a lot: analytics, reporting, BI, AI, machine learning, cohorts, big data. All of these words really are just in everything that we do, right? All the webinars we go to, all of the things that we're reading, it can get really confusing. Today, Justin and I just want to focus on areas that we feel can help you manage your revenue cycle and really take out the confusion. So the first thing we're going to do is jump in and start talking about what's the difference. What's the difference between reporting and analytics? And so here we go as thinking about reporting as a map, and think about analytics as a GPS. So a map will kind of help you understand where you are, how far along you are on a journey, but to really understand if there are obstacles, slowdowns, you need an alternate route, you're going to need a GPS. And that's really the difference between reporting and analytics. Reporting, you'll get information that's measured and is usually presented. It's organized to tell you how your business is performing. Think about KPIs. When you hear the term a report, think KPI. But it also creates questions. It's going to tell you that there is a problem, but that's really as far as reporting will go. Now think about analytics, really that GPS. Remember, it's about insight. Insight to what's ahead, insights that will help guide you to make decisions based on information. You can drill down into cohorts and segments and get meaningful information. But the most important piece to analytics is it helps answer the questions, typically those questions that are created by your reports. So while you have reports telling you that there is a problem, analytics is going to tell you where the problem is at. So that's really the main difference between reporting and analytics. And again, we sort of use those old school analogies of reporting's like that map that you had in your car, or for those of us old enough to remember when you used to print a map when you'd go on a trip. GPS is now, you know, part of your car, and it'll tell you avoid certain areas because there's a slowdown. So think about it in that regards as we go through this today. All right, so jumping on in, here we go. So we're going to talk about this journey with your revenue cycle data. And so I'm just going to go ahead and walk through this. But we see the revenue cycle broken into three main components: pre-service, post-service, post-adjudication. And when we're saying post-adjudication, we're talking about patient payments. We consider insurance payments as part of the post-service process. For our discussion today, we're going to focus on post-service. You'll be able to apply same processes and evaluate other areas of the revenue cycle using the same techniques that we're talking about today. But as we walk through the functional areas, we'll show you the differences in using analytics instead of reports that'll really help you improve your revenue cycle. And I think a lot of what we talk about today is really to give you ideas and ways that you can help focus to meet your goals. So, all right, let's jump in a little bit further here. So keeping them in sync with our thoughts about maps and GPSs, right? So let's talk about the path we're going to take today in the post-claim cycle. And we're talking about claim submission, claim editing, claim status, denials, and payments. So those are going to be the main areas that we dive into and show you the differences between reporting and analytics. So here we go. On the journey it begins. All right, so claim submission. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this up, and let's go ahead and just walk through this difference between reporting and analytics. So when you think about claim submission and reporting, pretty straightforward. You use a claim submission report or a claims reconciliation report just to make sure that claims are getting out of your system. It's a vital part of the revenue cycle, but it's only going to tell you the basics, right? That your claims were submitted out of your system and when. That claims aren't getting out of your system, of course, that's a problem. But what kind of problem and where did that problem start? So this is where we then take a look at analytics as opposed to just a claim reconciliation report. And we're talking about things that impact the claim submission process. So take a metric like average date of service to submission, where you're measuring the earliest date of service on a claim to the date that it's sent over to the payer or the clearinghouse, depending on what your process is. If you're a direct submitter, it would be when you're going out to the payer. If you're using a clearinghouse, it's when that comes to a clearinghouse. That is going to tell you where the problem is. The question is there a lag or an issue at charge entry? Are claims getting hung up in internal edits? This is the difference between analytics and reports. In your reports, you're going to know that your claims got out the door, but when you start to identify that you have a slowdown in your payments or that you're not getting paid timely, do you know what's causing that? And looking at that average days of service to submission is really going to help identify that. So I'll ask Justin to jump in here because he works a lot directly with our clients and can talk about how both of these areas are important.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously knowing that things are flowing as expected is definitely a best practice. You have to know that. But having the insight into there being an issue and knowing where that issue is just immensely more helpful. We worked with a provider yesterday, actually, who had seen a drop in their Medicare payments. And we tracked it down. It turns out that it was actually a claim submission issue in early April. So well over a month ago, and you know their claims had been flowing, but their Medicare claims had not been. So if they had known about that earlier, they would have been able to fix that issue earlier and could have prevented the entire problem from happening in the first place. A lot like Linda spoke about the GPS, giving you a different route option or changing your route in order to completely avoid a traffic slowdown of some sort. So if they had had that analytical information earlier, they could have diverted around the whole thing and simply not had a problem at this current time.
Right. So you can see the difference in those specific examples. The difference between reports just knowing something happened and analytics knowing why something happened. So our next area we're going to hit on is claim editing. Again, we're going to walk through an example of a report and how you would use analytics. So claim editing is the next stop here, And claim rates, great KPI. They measure that a claim did not hit any edits. And we're not saying that you shouldn't use reports and that you shouldn't have KPIs. We're just saying that there are ways that you want to augment what you're doing today and have these things set up in your arsenal so that you can pull it out when you identify that there's an issue. So you have claim rates, really telling you that a claim did not require any work, right? Requiring work costs more money. It's prior to the claim being sent out to the payer. This really is your measure on your level of effort to file a claim. The cleaner, the better. But then what do you do when that rate drops, right? How do you know where the problem is? So this is where analytics come in. So a great measure in the claim editing space is payer rejections. And we bring up payer rejections because it's a very focused and unique type of edit that you'll see. So a payer rejection is something that is rejected by the payer's front-end processing systems. Sometimes you'll hear it called front-end payer edits. It's not the same as a denial. It's before it gets into the adjudication system. But this can give you insight that there is an issue with a new payer edit, or if there is an issue at the clearinghouse. So if suddenly you're measuring this and you see an increase in this particular measure, you know that something is going on. It's usually, and the typical thing that we've seen is that there are changes at the payer. There's a new edit that's in place, and you start to see that come back as a payer rejection. So Justin, I know that you get you've gotten a lot of exposure to these claim editing reports and tracking this particular payer rejection. So I wonder if you want to share some information about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody obviously loves a good clean claim rate. It's something that everyone should look at. We talk to our provider clients about it a lot as well. But it really is something that's used a lot by upper management, maybe a C-suite, to really measure the efficiency of the revenue cycle, the health of the revenue cycle. But the payer rejections really allow users to drill down into those issues, to know where new edits are coming in, as Linda mentioned, where you're starting to see more of those rejections and where you'll start to see more of a slowdown in those payments actually coming in on those claims due to those rejections. And so drilling into those and giving the details to the users to really understand what's going on at that deeper level will really allow them to correct those issues much more quickly and easily than they can once they continue to happen and maybe become denials, or you start to see that spike in denials happening as well, or you get into timely filing errors. And being able to correct these issues more quickly and really stamp them out, make changes on your PM system, your EMR, EHR system, in order to avoid them will really simplify things and make things much more efficient, and really avoid those long denial workflows that you can come into contact with.
Yeah, and I think we could talk in each one of these areas, and we have done webinars on just each one of these stops on the journey, whether it's claim editing or claim submission. I will mention here in claim editing that we focus on clean claim rate. Again, that's the overall KPI of how well is how efficient are your claims processing out to the payer. When you need that deep dive, payer rejection, again, is a great indicator that there's something going on that may be a little beyond your control, right? So that's the one reason we picked this one to talk about, is you're not able, it's not an edit that you've put in place to stop and have a claim reviewed. It's something that's being rejected because there was a change at the payer. So you may have other areas that you focus on in the analytics space, whether it's eligibility-related denials or it's LCDs or NCDs, the need for custom edits that you may have created for certain reviews. But focusing on something like payer rejections, that is something that's beyond your control, can be very helpful. So now we'll jump over to the next stop of our journey, claim status. One of my favorite topics. I could talk about claim status for a long time. It's great having a partner like Justin because we both love revenue cycle and could talk forever about these things. But Claim status is really the hot topic these days, and really it's because not knowing claim status can be very costly, right? It creates calls to the payers. You spend time on a payer's website. You're looking for information. And what you'll see is a typical claim status report is going to be a detailed list. It's usually a detailed list of claims and their current status. And so basically it's giving you the current status of a claim. You can look at that data and try and get an idea or a sense of what the typical statuses are in your claims. But then what do you do when there's an issue with the payments? How much is a claim status going to really tell you? And we see that across the board that there is a wide variety in the quality of statuses that come from payers. So what we're recommending around the claim status space is take a little bit deeper dive and use information from a remit that is matched back to the claim so that you get a much clearer picture of what an issue may be. You can segment this data by payer, procedure code, providers, and based on your knowledge of payment cycles, you really have an opportunity to find an issue within a day or two of it happening. If a payer is having an issue with remit generation, maybe claims are stuck in appended status. We really see this a lot. And one of the easier payers to start looking at this with is, of course, Medicare, right? It has a very defined payment floor. Your Medicaids who have check write schedules can sometimes also be easier to roll this process out with. But when you're looking at that information of claims that have remits matched back to them, for your Medicare, on day 15, the overwhelming majority of them should have a remit matched back. And if they don't on day 15, you know that that's a problem. So, Justin, what are some of the situations that you've seen where our clients or providers that you've worked with, organizations, use claim status?
It really falls back into making sure that the claims are getting to that final status and getting into an accepted status, and then, of course, getting to that payment status where you actually are matching that remit back to the claim to know that the claim's been either or has been paid or had some final adjudication done to it so that you can handle that from there. And if that's not happening, then that's really what we see as a real canary in the coal mine, so to speak, that there may be some sort of issue either on the payer side or somewhere else that needs to be identified. And digging into that and really understanding where those issues are happening. Is it across the board, or is it broken down by payer or specific modality or procedure code or what have you, that will really give you that information to start to dig in deeper and figure out what's going on there. And that'll help you really start to know that there is an issue well before that financial end of month or end of quarter, when things really get into that crunch and the issue has to be resolved yesterday, if you can resolve it sooner than that. And Linda mentioned your Medicares, your Medicaids, with those regular payment cycles, regular payment floors and check writes. That's obviously very easy to track. Very easy to look at. When you submitted a claim, you should have a payment on X date for those. But you can dig in even further for other payers. You can look at your top 10 payers. You can get an average of payments over a period of time, whether you're looking at it weekly, monthly, or quarterly, and then start to look at that and set thresholds and start to say, do we have the payments we expect to see? How far off are we? And you can set thresholds at looking at just specific percentages off to really sound the alarm, so you can see over that period of time that you're starting to see a drop in payments and handle it accordingly. And again, getting that specific information on payer or even deeper into it on procedure code or whatever is especially important. One note on this, though, is the biggest piece of this, really the success of it is driven by how many electronic remits you're receiving, what percentage of remits you're receiving electronically. Having that high EDI adoption rate is super key on this to be able to make those comparisons. Without that data, without everything coming in electronically or as much as possible coming in electronically, it's very tough to do those comparisons because you're really trying to compare apples to oranges if you don't have all of the electronics remits coming in.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think just to mention another just best practice, not necessarily related, but making sure that you're tracking your EDI adoption rate, whether it's through your claims, claim status transactions that you're doing, or through remits. And I think we've seen that through CAQH studies that show the more that you get really shaves dollars off the industry itself, and so it's a way to save dollars. But claim status, again, one of our favorite topics. We love talking about claim status, and I think the remits matching back to the claims are a key component and a great way to augment information that you're getting from claim status, because the quality of that transaction just is not the same across the board. And so when you have that remit and know those payment cycles, it becomes way more valuable. All right, here we go, a little bit, another stop, denials. I definitely don't like talking about denials. They're my least favorite thing. Who wants to talk about denials? But really, we know denials are just part of what we do. No matter what we do, there will always be some level of denials. The key is to try and reduce the amount of denials that you have, and that your expectation of what is getting paid is accurate. So we look at reports here, we're thinking denial rate, right? That's the KPI. It's a great KPI to use, and it really just tells you what percentage of your claims are being denied, 0 payments. And it seems very straightforward, but we'll tell you that it's actually one of the most complicated things to calculate, because everyone looks at a denial differently. Different organizations classify different remark codes, claim adjustment reason codes. No two organizations do them the exact same way. So you actually may have seen the HFMA initiative to try and define categories for denials, and we're excited to see that initiative come out of HFMA and are following that very closely, because this is a problem that we have with providers and organizations, is trying to define what is a denial. So it's basically percentage of claims that got denied, right? What was 0 paid, and what percentage of the claims require rework. I think it's important here that when you're looking at analytics, though, right, it's the next step. You may have a problem with denials. Your denial rate went up, but why did the rate go up? So looking at remark codes, not just claim adjustment reason codes, but remark codes, putting those in cohorts so that you can then segment them off by procedure code, by payer, by provider. That's where you'll start to see an issue, typically with a specific procedure code. Sometimes you'll see it with a specific provider. So in the denial space, this really reminds me a lot of the clean claim rate. So Justin, I don't know if you want to jump in here, but the denial rate and the clean claim rate are really two main KPIs we see, and show very similar things.
Yeah, absolutely. They're obviously, looking at this both ways is very important. And just like the clean claim rate, denial rate is a great way to look at the health of your revenue cycle system. It's something, again, that upper management, the C-suite, they love to see that as a KPI. But having that specific analytical information on the really specific info is very important in figuring out problems and helping to solve the problems. And one thing about this is they can be looked at very, very closely in very tight time frames, because you want to react to it very quickly if you do see a large spike in denials, especially broken down by payer and looking at it by procedure code and then specific remark codes coming back. Other metrics you don't want to look at too closely, because you can become overly reactionary and maybe be jumping at shadows, trying to solve things that aren't really issues or aren't fully identified yet. But with this, you can look at it in very tight time frames and really identify issues really quickly and prevent those larger issues where large amounts of cash flow can be impacted. Obviously, everybody's going to have some portion of denials. It's going to happen. So you're obviously not trying to get to 0, although that would be great if it were possible. But you can look at this for things that may have changed, whether it's a new denial coming back on a procedure code, or a new denial by a payer. just blanketly across the board, then you can start to action on those, or even increase numbers of denials, just denials or specific types of denials starting to spike. And then you can action on those and push forward and really help to, again, with that GPS, you can take that alternate route and avoid that huge slowdown, or at least greatly reduce it.
Yeah, I think you're right. This is one of those that you can look at really closely. And, you know, where your denial rate, you'll see a fluctuation in that with each remit that you get in, and then it may level out over the month. When you're looking at the specific remark codes and you've got it in the right cohort and you've got it in the right segment, you'll see an issue very quickly that you can action on, maybe put an edit in up front into your system or at your clearinghouse and really stop the issue before it gets too much worse. So I agree. I think time is one of the unique differentiators in looking at the denial area. All right, the next one we're going to jump into is payments, one of my favorite. Who doesn't love a good report about the dollars that are coming in, right? So when we look at payments, again, we're referring to insurance payments, not patient payments. So generally when we're seeing reports based on payments, you get a report received, remits that you've received by payer, by date, by payment amounts, and it's used a lot for reconciliation. But what we see is that's not the full story. We think that you can use the information that is in a payments report to dig into not just your payments, but look at the remit as a whole, where you're going to measure the % of remit adjustments to the charges of the claim, and you review those by category, whether it's contractual obligations or what people call COs or PIs, payer-initiated, the patient responsibilities or the PRs, so you get a full picture of what's going on. I think this is an area that there's a lot of opportunity for in your analytics space because, again, we typically think about reporting in this area. It's either going to be focused on specific denials and denial trends, but you can actually use analytics in this space to do more revenue forecasting. You can identify if there's an issue with a contracted rate at your payer, so maybe your contract changed, or are you suddenly seeing an increase in the patient responsibility. So again, each area that you may find a different issue would require a different strategy for correction, but I think this particular area I find very interesting, and it's one of the most underutilized areas of reporting / analytics that we see because there is the higher focus typically on denials or types of claim edits. And so, Justin, I know you've had experience around payments and used the analytics information to answer the age-old question, right, that we hear a lot of.
Yeah, the age-old question of why is my cash down?
Yeah, that question. That's right.
That's the one. Yeah. So we have heard that, and I'm sure probably everybody on this call has heard some form of that question as well, and just seeing that happen and then trying to figure out why it's happened. This is consistent with what we've talked about with edits and denials. It shows where the problem is, and it keeps people from having that blanket statement. It can tell you where the problem is, and even why potentially the problem is, and help track down all those reasons behind it. It can show changes in different types of liabilities, whether it's, again, like, increased deductibles or increased patient responsibility in general, and break that down by payer and show where those liabilities are being diverted. And like anything else here, there are lots of different variables going into this. I think we've probably sat down and talked about the different reasons why cash may be down or cash flow may be interrupted, and we could probably come up with 100 different reasons. And so being able to narrow those down is extremely important, and have a good starting place to resolve the issue. There's lots of different outside factors, even outside of a practice, that could cause this, whether it's Medicare legislation, large employers in the area that have changed their plan, et cetera, that can cause this, and being able to identify that and adjust, whether you're adjusting your statement process or your collections at time of service or things like that. So this can really drive lots of different parts of a business, lots of different parts of a practice, and getting that information quickly can help people to be proactive about it or more proactive about it in order to mitigate the issue.
Yeah, good points there. And again, so it may be an area that you've overlooked in the past, so we would just encourage you to take a look at the information you're receiving in your payment files, and is there an opportunity to drill deeper into those, because we think there's a lot of opportunity there. So the next area we want to do is really just take a little bit deeper dive on a specific example, sort of to see it in action. And we're going to focus on claim denials because it is one that people do ask a lot of questions on. And so when we look at it really, you know that you'll have your denial report, you have your denials by remark codes. So with your report, you have denial rate, what was zero paid. Then you have your remark code cohort grouped by procedure code, and see that there's an issue there. As we dive a little bit deeper here, I'm going to just point out again, the denial rate calculation is again very tricky, and I know it sounds silly to say that, but there are so many different ways in which people will categorize a denial. Certain CO contractual obligations, people will say, well, that's not really a denial, or it really is. So there is a variability across organizations as to what gets counted. So someone's denial rate, when Justin and I are working with organizations and provider groups, we'll have one group will have a certain denial rate, and we'll have an exact same group, same type of provider type, same geographic area, and their denial rate will be completely different. And the answer when we drill into that is, what do they call a denial? So for purpose of this, we're just using the HFMA definition of total claims denied over the total claims in the remit. And again, we use claims. We don't actually, for the purposes of calculations, we wouldn't necessarily suggest that you look at the line items, because one, if you don't look at the claim in a holistic view, so if you just say, well, I'm just looking at this line item that was denied, you don't look at the whole picture of how it was billed out, you might be missing something, so you have to touch the claim. So we'll look at the denial rate in that particular way. The industry standard is variable. We see denial rates across the board from anywhere between 6 to 10% denial rates. Some groups are lower than that, and some are much higher than that. And what it's going to tell you is really how your denials are trending overall. What we then say is, well, we prefer to look at the analytics, and we want to look at denials by remark codes. So we have that cohort of looking at information by payer and procedure code. We would then segment that by provider, and you might choose to segment by different types of providers. And the types that you may see would be referring providers, for example. If you're a group that has patients referred to you, and the referring provider is responsible for the authorization, so you're going to track denials for authorization, and you segment that out by referring provider, you can figure out which one of your referring providers is, causing a problem for you. The industry standard is it's variable here, and probably not even applicable, because this is a measure to show how you are performing as an organization. But this would then give you an opportunity to see a specific issue with a procedure code that you have, or a rev code, a payer, or a provider. So I think that the key here is, when you're looking at the denials, take the denial rate, use that as your plain measure, and then you use the analytics to help you measure and find where your specific problem is. Okay, so the next thing we want to jump into really is talking about the keys to success.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the keys to success in this journey, as we called it, you really want to make sure that you have an area of focus. You want to keep very focused and really know what you want to keep an eye on. Obviously, we talked a lot about post-service today. There are lots of other places that could be monitored, but you want to make sure that you're keeping your focus narrow as you're doing this so that you're not just getting an overload of information and trying to cover everything. You want to make sure that you're being as focused as possible to get to what you want to look at when you're digging into this. You also want to be very consistent. You want to perform consistent analysis. And again, we mentioned this kind of with like claim status and remit match. It's all about making sure that you're comparing apples to apples on things. So, getting to the right data set might take some initial tweaking and going back and forth to get to exactly what you want to look at. But eventually getting to a consistent data set and looking at that in a consistent time frame is extremely important so that you're making those comparisons apples to apples and you're seeing the changes that are happening. And as you raise and lower things, you can continue to change and adjust your thresholds. And we all know that there are expected denials and unexpected denials and things like that, but you want to make sure that you're adjusting those thresholds so that you are looking at the same specific information and looking for the changes and seeing the changes you want to see. And then communicating those findings to the right people. Getting the right info to the right people is extremely important. You can't just find the information. You got to find the people who can actually impact upon it as well within your org or outside of your org. And getting the info to the right people so that the action can be taken to improve that metric one way or the other is really the final step and the last very important step in this process.
Yep, thanks, Justin. So I want to hit on a summary, and then we'll move forward to take some questions. So really what the idea behind our discussion today and sharing information was that you can look at specific areas of your revenue cycle. There are going to be reports and KPIs that you use, but when you're talking about analytics, think about those particular metrics that can help answer the questions. And so what we suggest in the claim submission area is you'll have your claim submission report that claims get out the door, but then looking at average data service to submission to identify areas of lag, whether it's charge entry or just getting it out of your system, or you're hung up in some payer or some edits within your host system. In the claim editing space, you'd have your clean claim rates, one of the #1 metrics that people use to measure just the overall performance of your claim editing, but then drill into that using payer rejections, looking and determining, do you have an issue with a specific payer problem? These are things that are beyond your control and unexpected, so that's another reason to focus on that particular area. Looking at the claim status, you would have your claim status report. Are you getting good statuses? Are claims being statused appropriately? But taking that a step further and looking at information of claims that have remits matched back to them so that you have that payment information from the 835 tied back to the claim. When you're looking at denials, you've got your denial report, again, very similar to that clean claim rate. It's that KPI that tells you overall how is that particular area performing, but then drilling in by remark codes. That's going to be the key to identifying some specific actionable things on your denials. Then looking at the payments, your remits received report is basically your reconciliation. You're getting files in as you would expect it. But when you start looking at the percentage of adjustments that are being made, it can be an early indicator of problems that you're having. So again, a summary of what we would suggest when you're working in a specific area, and you could expand those, the analytics section out just based on your organization. So before we just open for questions, we'll just share a little bit about ourselves and Availity. So, too far. It's nothing like driving slides. So really, what does Availity do? We're uniquely situated in the market because we offer tools and services to both payers and providers. We think that really helps us build tools that fill the gaps between payers and providers and help us build a more efficient healthcare system. So with that, we'll open it up. I think we do have a couple questions that have come in on our chat, so we'll just pull up this last slide here and use this to help us remind us as we go through our questions.
Thank you, Linda and Justin, for a great presentation today. So we'll go ahead and dive right into the questions. Again, you can go ahead and submit any that you have into this Q&A box if you have not already. So we'll go ahead and get started. So first, is it typical for a payer to modify a process without notifying providers that results in denied claims?
Here's what I would say is it's not typical that they would change a medical policy and begin denying a claim. I think what we have seen is that payers will sometimes start using what they call informational edits. So they'll start flagging a claim for an edit, but what I've seen happen is that a payer will use informational edits for a long period of time before they actually flip the switch, so to speak, and start then denying the claim. So I've seen payers use informational edits in advance of denying claims. The other thing, though, I've seen is that they'll communicate out, but lots of times there are, especially throughout this past year with COVID, there have been so many provider communications or communications to systems, facilities, that you may miss it because there's so much information coming out about how to bill certain COVID charges, or there's so many government changes around processing of claims as people may be returning back to what we would call typical processing. So it's not typical that they would not notify providers that something's happening. What we see is that they've either given you the notice for so long, it kind of feels like, when are they actually going to start denying? Or it's just part of this huge chain of information flow that comes out of payers that it gets overlooked. Justin, I don't know if your experience is the same with that, but that's typically what I've seen.
Yeah, I was going to mention my thought was around those informational edits that then become real edits, but they kind of have been there, like you said, so long that they've kind of maybe fallen through the cracks or something like that, or possibly that there are just interpretations of something that weren't expected, maybe a unclear edit or something like that, or informational message that was coming through that could cause that for sure.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's not that they, I would say it's not that they try and surprise you. I just feel like there's just so much flow of information, and it's like the messaging is so targeted. If you've accidentally ever subscribed to the Medicare listserv and checked everything, that one day your inbox fills up with like 20 notifications and you're trying to remember which one applies to your provider type. It gets to be overwhelming. So.
Thank you, Linda and Justin. So we'll move on here. Next question, what would you recommend as check-in times?
Yes, so as Justin mentioned on the denial, so check-in times, I think it's a little difficult, but there's definitely a sweet spot between checking too soon and checking too late, right? So Justin used the term jumping at shadows. And what I would say is on your denials, I think you could do that weekly. And I would suggest checking in on your denials weekly, if not more frequently. Because on your denials, when you're getting that denial type, that's a quick indicator that something's happened. Your payer EDI return rates, I'd also say that's weekly. For the most part, I'm going to go with, you could say that it is weekly. On the payments, when it's a percentage, you could track that just also weekly, but biweekly or even monthly. My take on the use of analytics is to apply it on a weekly schedule, looking at those things, because you're billing claims out every week. You're typically seeing your full gamut of claims being submitted in a week, getting them out the door. If you're the kind of organization like home health, or you're holding claims and you're only billing 30 days at a time, those sorts of things, hospice organizations, skilled nursing, you obviously you're doing 30 days. But if you're getting claims or you're getting remits in on a regular basis, anything around payments and denials you could do very frequently. Justin, what's your thoughts around the timings?
Yeah, I would agree with that. The one thing I would say is when you go to the claim submission metrics and looking at claims flowing in and looking at the average date of service submission, I think that could be checked more often, in my opinion, just to make sure that you're getting those claims in, because it is such an early indicator of an issue. I think you could look at that. Now, of course, it depends on, like you mentioned, home health and hospice, which are billed more or less monthly. But I think you could look at it a lot more frequently based on claim submission times. You're looking at it even, a couple times a week or even more frequently, just to really check that and be aware of any issues that are flowing through.
Now, I will say on the claim submission, I've seen organizations that follow that way more closely. Obviously, that your claims go out the door the same day, like you're mentioning, you would watch that daily. The other thing I would say, though, is I've seen people that'll monitor that with only give themselves like a 2-hour window from when they know that they always file a claim. So if you're doing an automated claim file submission process, you may flag those with an alert system that would tell you that it's, you're 2 hours beyond when you normally file claims, or you don't have the response back to the batch that you've submitted within a 2-hour period. So those kind of things are more real-time alerts, and I think of those as more alerts versus monitoring of the health of the revenue cycle. I think those are just monitoring for operational indicators as opposed to the health of the revenue cycle.
Great, thanks for tackling that one, Linda and Justin. Next here, for the denial rate calculation, do you only count zero pay claim denials into this calculation instead of partial claim denials?
Yep, so for the purposes of what we've done, we've looked at zero paid claims. I think, again, that's where we go back to trying to get to an industry standard of how you would look at something. If a claim isn't fully paid, right, so if you, here's what I'd say is the way we see most work queues handle a denial is that if it is there is a line item that got a zero pay on it, so it's a partial paid claim, and it's a line item, and line item 2, 3, and 4, they got paid, but line 1 didn't. That whole claim is going to fall into the work queue to be reviewed. So for the purposes of counting the denial rate, it was zero paid claims. But I think that's where we get into it. Doesn't mean that there's not work being done on that claim that got partially paid. So I don't know. I would love to say it's a very straightforward answer, but it's just not. And it goes back to when you're going to do it, pick a way, stick with it, be consistent. Know that I feel like my opinion is until the HFMA initiative is complete and the industry agrees that this is how we're going to measure, it's going to be very difficult for you to measure yourself against your peers. So pick a way that you want to do it and measure it consistently all the time.
Thanks, Linda. Looks like we've got time for just a few more here. So next, what tools do your providers find most useful for analytics and real-time monitoring?
Yep. Justin, you want to take that one? Because you're the monitoring guru.
I guess so. Yeah, and there are lots of different monitoring tools out there, specifically around system monitoring. I mean, some people might be using specific things. There's big players out there like Dynatrace, Cisco, App Dynamics, Splunk. A lot of those are systemic monitoring to make sure that systems are up and running, and they can be used to monitor other items. There's a lot of customization that can be done to those to monitor specific items. We at Availity also are building real-time tools because we have the data, right? Providers are sending us the data. We're getting data back from payers, so we're kind of a centralized location for that. So if you're looking for real-time monitoring tools specifically around looking at these transactions and looking at these analytic measures, then I would say to go to that claims clearinghouse, because they're going to be the ones that have the data and are able to get that information back to you.
All right, give me one second, just navigating through some of these last ones here. All right, so our last question here is, are there any other examples of how analytics can help with denials?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like what we talked about, it's around understanding when the denial is happening, how quick it takes you to respond. I think other things that you can look at around denials are first, your rate of success on the first response to a denial. So are you doing a first level appeal? Did it require a second level appeal? And those are some data points that you can take when you're actually working on your payer contracts, is that you've tracked that you've received a denial, you've resubmitted the claim, and then it's paying, 100% of the time when it's resubmitted. So that can give you an opportunity to try and improve your contracts or have your medical policies changed. So when you're thinking about denials, it is, what type of denial are you having, but it's also measuring your efficiency of resolving the denial, how long does it take to get paid on the second round, those sorts of things. Average days of service to payment when you're looking at a resubmission of a denied claim also. So I think there is a great opportunity there in the denial space that isn't just around what is your denial rate or what is your top denial. It is how much work do you have to do to resolve your denials. So lots of opportunities there.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I was just going to add to that success rate that Linda was talking about, that you can get really granular with that as well, right? You can look at success rate by remark code, you can look at success rate by remark code by procedure code, and really start to drill down into where those successes are and what is working to respond to those denials and what isn't working. So you can really get a lot of information that way as well.
Thank you again, Linda and Justin. So that is all the time that we have left for today. Thank you again for an excellent presentation and to Availity for sponsoring today's webinar. To learn more about the content presented today, please check out the resources section on your webinar console, and also please fill out the post-webinar survey. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.